Okay.
Great, great. Hi, everyone. This is John Daly again from BQB Publishing. I'm here today with Dorothea Jensen, author of the historical fiction novel A Bus from Lafayette. How are you doing today, Dorothea?
I'm fine. The snow is melting.
Good, good, good. Where,
I
where are
got
you?
up. I live in New Hampshire, and the last couple of weeks, when I get up in the morning, the temperature's been about 4 degrees above zero, and this
Ooh,
morning it was 45. So uh, I think that spring might come. I don't know. I'm not holding
good,
my breath though.
good, a good state for sure. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and your interests.
Well, I was actually born in Boston, which is about 75 miles from where I live now. But when I was a little girl, my family moved to a small town in Illinois called Chillicothe, Illinois. And I actually, the town where I live in now is Kentucky, New Hampshire. It's also called Hopkinton, but Kentucky. So I guess I was fated to live in small towns that had Native American names. So anyway, so I grew up in Chillicothe, Illinois, and I went to college in Minnesota, and I majored in English at Carleton College up in Northfield, Minnesota. And then later, about 5 years later, I actually got a master's degree in secondary education at the University of New Mexico. And for a while, I taught middle and high school English. So anyway, um, it's been quite the odyssey. I have lived in many, many places. I'm not sure I can remember them all, but I've lived, as I said, in Massachusetts and Illinois and Minnesota and also California and Brazil. My husband and I were in the Peace Corps in Brazil a long, long time ago. And let's see, Tennessee and Virginia and the Netherlands and New Mexico and what did we do after that? And Pennsylvania and back to Minnesota and now New Hampshire ever since 1991. So when people ask me where are you from, I'm never quite sure what I should tell them. But
Very well traveled from what it sounds like for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So, your book, A Bus from Lafayette, it was written for younger readers, and although older readers can enjoy it just as easily, it takes place in 1825, kind of in, I think, maybe the post-colonial period. Can you tell me more about
Early.
your book and why you decided to write it?
Well, it's easy to say why I decided to write it, and it's a little odd, but this is, writers get their ideas from funny places sometimes. But I was on a bus tour in England, a Jane Austen bus tour, and um, we spent a lot of time on the bus. And so as a result, we were all telling each other stories to entertain each other. And all I could think of course, was Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, because we were definitely on a pilgrimage. And uh, I told the story about how my eighth grade teacher had met Geronimo as a little girl and then shook hands with him and then shook hands with me. So I said, so I have shaken hands with someone who shook hands with Geronimo. Well, at that point, a woman from the front of the bus said, well, I have been kissed by someone who was kissed by someone who was kissed by Lafayette. Well, of course, the first thing I did was go up and say, right here, I want a kiss. So she gave me a kiss. But then it turns out that her great grandmother had been a little girl during Lafayette's farewell tour. And in 1824, she had been picked by her town to give Lafayette a posy of flowers, and he had kissed her on the cheek. And one of the things they called it in those days was a bus on the cheek. So that's where my title came from. So let's see what happened next. Oh, but that was the very first that I heard that Lafayette had come back to America 50 years after the beginning of the American Revolution and toured the whole country, all 24 states. There were 24 states in those days. And I found out when I started reading about this tour that he actually came to my town, Hopkinton, New Hampshire, And in fact, I was able to get a marker installed last summer.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah, I'm on the board. I joined the board of the Lafayette Trail Inc., which is putting markers all over the United States. Almost, I think it's like 185 markers, but I made sure one of them went into my town. So that's what happens when you join a board, I guess. So, so anyway, um, I found out not only that he came to my town, but that after he stopped in my town, he actually, in his carriage, went right by my house, which was
Oh,
there at the time. So I thought, well, there must be some Lafayette molecules floating around still. It was very exciting. So then I started thinking about what life was like in those days when he came through. And in the end, I ended up writing a story about a 14-year-old girl who has a number of problems. She has a stepmother who actually used to be her old maid school teacher aunt, and she has red hair, and she is teased by her cousin, who is a really irritating pretty girl who makes fun of her, and by an older boy named Dickon, who also makes fun of her. So, she just might meet Lafayette when he comes through her town. Everybody in town is all excited because he's coming to New Hampshire. Now, you have to understand that the farewell tour was a unique event in American history. There's never been anything like it before or since. He traveled 6,000 miles by carriage and horseback and boat and so forth. And everywhere he went, he was absolutely mobbed like a rock star. And they estimate that a third of the American population actually went to see him. And that was
wow.
several million people. So I have a feeling that other people out there, whether they know it or not, also are descended from people who got a bus from Lafayette, not just me. So anyway, that's sort of how I got interested in it and how I wrote the story.
Oh, that's great.
Now I had,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah, it was very exciting, and it took me quite a long time. I mean, I first heard about this in 1997. So you see, the book didn't come out until I guess 2016. So it did take me quite a long time to read it. Now, I knew about the Revolution because I'd read a lot of historical novels myself about the American Revolution, and I knew a little bit about Lafayette because I'd written another book called The Riddle of Pencroft Farm, and
Mhm.
this came out in 1989. It's been in print ever since, mostly because it was designated a teacher's choice selection by the International Reading Association, which is now the International Literacy Association. So it's used in schools a good deal to teach about the American Revolution. So I knew a little about him, but I learned a whole lot more
Oh,
after
I
I
bet.
after I got that kiss.
Oh, I bet. So what kind of reception have you gotten for the book? I know the Amazon reviews, they look great. I know you've won some awards as well.
Yes, it has won a number of awards. I do have all of them listed on my website, dorotheajensen.com. And it's always very nice to win an award. And generally speaking, they are winning awards for best historical fiction for young readers of some variety or another. And that's been really a lot of fun. Uh, so I wanted to just talk about one of the reviews, which is one of my very favorites, in which the guy said, I also enjoyed the history that was expertly woven into the story. Never once did I roll my eyes and think that I was being force-fed information that I didn't care about. Well, to me, that is high praise indeed, because
Absolutely, absolutely.
it's not easy doing it.
No, no. Well, that brings me to the next question I was going to ask. You mentioned how this had taken you a while to write. What would you say was the hardest part about writing this book?
Well, of course, whenever you write historical fiction, you have to do an awful lot of research. That's the first thing. You have to find out what really happened before you can make up a story that you can put inside that story, inside the history. and weaving that history into a story is kind of tricky because you don't want it to feel like it's didactic, like it's a textbook. You want it to come out naturally somehow. Um, and in this story, the history that everybody knows, this is the other problem, of course, is that with major historical events, everybody already knows who's reading the book how it turned out. So
Right.
you have to figure out ways of putting some kind of suspense into the story because it's obviously not going to come from the question who won the American Revolution, right?
Right.
And in this story, what I tried to do was have Clara learn about everything that Lafayette did to help us in the American Revolution. So throughout the story, she's getting more and more involved in learning about what Lafayette did for us. And so as she learns about it, so do we. And that was a little tricky to do, but I really enjoyed doing it in the end.
Good, good. Now, that was the hardest part. What would you say was the most rewarding part for you about writing it?
Well, I think the most rewarding part, and I'm sure you found this too, is creating characters that I really come to love. And I have to tell you that every single time I reread it, I am moved to tears when I get to the ending of it. And that's despite the fact that I know what's going to happen. It's not like it's a big mystery. I know exactly what's going to happen, but even so, it does move me to tears. And it reminds me of the fact that when I was a little girl, I read a lot of historical fiction, and I quickly realized that one of the reasons it wasn't just the history, it was the fact that the author created characters that could engage your emotions, and that's what made the history come alive. And I remember very clearly that when I was in third grade, I read the last of the 7 Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And my teacher happened to bump into my mother later that day, and she said to her, "Did you know that Dorothea has been crying all day because she has finished the last of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books?" So you can see I have a long tradition of crying when I finish a historical fiction book.
Understood.
Ah.
So, in addition to being an author, you are also a playwright and an actress. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I've written a couple of plays that were very different from each other. One was quite a long time ago when we lived in Minnesota, and it was entitled Hoichi, and it was an adaptation of a Japanese folk tale. And it was performed in No style. That's No spelled Noh. And just so you know, I've heard all the jokes, mostly from my husband, saying things like, "Well, that was no play," etc. So don't try and pull any on me because I've heard them all already. And anyway, it was challenging to write this because first I had to understand all the elements of the story, and it's a very strange story. It's a ghost story, actually. And then I had to learn all about no drama, and no drama is a very old form of theater. It was, I think, something like the 1200s was when it started, and it's highly stylized. And we had a no master who came and directed the play at the what was it? Oh, I can't think of the art, the art museum in Minneapolis. That's where they put it on. Anyway, so I had to learn all about no drama and how did it work. And one of the things I found out is that most of it is written in verse, in blank verse or some kind of verse. So I had to do that in verse, which was a bit of a challenge. And then it's characterized by plays on words. And I don't mean funny puns. I mean wordplay that reverberates somehow. It's a very serious story. I mean, a whole bunch of people commit suicide in it by jumping into the ocean. So it's not what you call a laugh riot, but it's so I had to come up with ways to do word plays that would be appropriate for that. And I actually loved doing it. And since then, I've actually written a lot of other stories in verse. I've written 5 modern Christmas stories that are modeled on a visit from St. Nicholas. It was the night before Christmas, that kind of thing. And a couple of years ago, I was inspired by Hamilton, actually, and I thought I would write sort of a companion volume to A Bust from Lafayette, in which I just set forth exactly what Lafayette did for us in the Revolution. And I did it in rhyming verse, if you can believe it. And
Wow.
it's called Liberty Loving Lafayette, How America's Favorite Fighting Frenchman Helped Win Our Independence. So this is rather a unique book, and I'm happy to tell you that it's won some awards. So it's all very interesting. That's the main nonfiction that I have published, and it's great fun. And one of the things I'm hoping to do, the bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour is coming up in a year or two, and I'm hoping to. I am very heavily involved in the planning of this through an organization called the American Friends of Lafayette, and we're planning to have reenactments. We want to have arts and crafts. We want to have performances, perhaps of Liberty Loving Lafayette or scenes from A Bust from Lafayette, and writing competitions and that kind of thing when the actual bicentennial gets here. It's going to go on for quite a long time, and so I'm involved in that. What else did you ask me? Oh, the other play. The other play I wrote was actually based on historical information and quotations for a sort of reenactment of Lafayette's visit to Sturbridge, Massachusetts in 1824, I think it was, as part of his farewell tour. Now, Sturbridge, Massachusetts now has a living history museum there called Old Sturbridge Village, which is set in the early 1800s, 1830s, 1820s, 1830s, which is wonderful for me because, of course, A Bust from Lafayette is set in 1825. And so it's really fun to go there and see. You can actually see how people lived. In fact, of course, I did a good deal of research, not only there, but also on their website. I learned a lot about life in the 1820s. So anyway, I did write this play. It was performed. And here's the deal, okay? I wasn't allowed to perform in it because, and I quote, women didn't speak in public in those days, unquote. So that was a little frustrating, to say the least, but it was still great fun to hear people saying things that I had written. So what else did you want me to talk about? I'm sort of losing track here.
Oh no, that's great. I think it's great. It's very clear that the things you write about, you're very passionate about and you live, and that's.
Oh, I am. And the more I learned about Lafayette, the more I was really, I don't know, did I show you the cover? I can't remember. I learned what a wonderful, wonderful person he was. And among other things, not only was he a very brave soldier, but he also was a very good friend to Washington through crises that were very difficult for Washington. He knew he could always depend on Lafayette to back him up. He also was successful and effective in his military role. But the one of the fun things is that I found that he had a wonderful sense of humor, a very self-deprecating sense of humor, which is my favorite kind. And for instance, there's a story that I put in A Bust from Lafayette. I refer to it, which actually happened, in which he was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine. He was shot through the leg, and they took him to a farmhouse so that the doctor could check and make sure that the bullet wasn't in there and so forth. And in order to examine Lafayette, the doctor had him lie down on top of the dining room table at this farmhouse. And in the middle of this, in walks George Washington and all of his senior aides. And Lafayette took a look at Washington and said, "Well, I hope you're not hungry and mistake me for dinner." You know? And I thought to myself, I think one of the roles that Lafayette performed was he was very, very charming, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he made people laugh. And I can't help but think that among other reasons that he was supportive, that Washington found him to be such a support, is he made him laugh. I mean, Washington had just lost his first major battle, or one of his first major battles, and to make a joke probably was helpful in some very, very, very minor way.
Oh, that's a
So,
great story. That's a great story. Well, I
oh,
want
there's
to.
many of
Oh,
them.
go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to say I want to thank you for joining me today and talking about yourself and your book, and it's all been very interesting. Can you tell people how they can find out more about you and what you've written?
Well, I do have a lot of social media out there. The primary place to look is my website, which is DorotheaJensen.com, and that's DorotheaJensen.com. And I have lots and lots of information on that website, and including pictures and so forth of people, events, and things that I talk about in my story. And I also, the other wonderful thing, I think, is there's another website that is fun to look at called publish.com. And this is a place where authors can post little bits of their stories and then tell where they got the idea for it or give other background information. And I'm happy to tell you that my Publish account has had almost 300,000 hits since I started writing it several years ago. And recently I started looking at the things I wrote, and I thought, I mean, I do, as you can tell, enjoy making video recordings. And so I started making video recordings of these bubbles and with the pictures and so forth. And I'm going to be posting those on DorotheaJensen.com and so forth. And I'm having a lot of fun doing that.
Oh, that's
Do
great.
not
Yeah.
go I used to have a website called abusfromlafayette.com, but it has been taken over by a Nigerian scam operation. And if you go there, it's full of links that if you click on them, you go to some Nigerian stock buying thing. So please don't go there. It's just DorotheaJensen.com, please.
DorotheaJensen.com. Great. Well, thanks again for
Yeah,
joining me here. I appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
thank you. I
Great.
appreciate you interviewing me. It's been a lot of fun, and it's fun to see your face after several years of only doing emails back and forth. So
That's right.
anyway,
That's right. It's good to have that sort of up close and personal
that's
confidence
right.
conversations for sure. So thanks again, Dorothea. You have a good
Thank you, John. Bye bye.